Well, it's day 13 of South Africa's nationwide lockdown. Thank you so much for choosing Morning Live. And just taking a quick look at what's happening around the world. And Reuters reporting currently that Wuhan city, remember that was the original epicenter of this coronavirus outbreak, they have finally ended the lockdown. And this is 76 days into the rise of that pandemic. And since that city was sealed off on January the 23rd. So those who are well and residents as well as visitors to that city will be allowed to leave. But there are still some restrictions in place because they are worried about a second wave, as it were. But coming back home, more than 3,800 South Africans stranded abroad have requested assistance to come back home. Now, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation says that an overwhelming majority of those are stranded because of lockdowns and the almost complete suspension of flights in various countries. So to talk to us more about this and getting South Africans back home, we joined now via Skype by the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina. Morning to your viewers as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Minister, please, can you just start by giving us an update on exactly how many South Africans, at least that you're aware of, have actually managed to be repatriated from other countries at this point?
Well, in terms of the categories of persons that I announced would be the focus of the department, we have a list of 3,639 South Africans who've indicated that they're stranded and require help to get back home.
Now, Minister, I'm sure your department has been inundated. I can imagine embassies also being flooded because I look at my inbox and people are actually contacting us, asking if we can help them get in touch with your department to help get some people who are stranded abroad back home. So how many people have actually asked? Do you have any figures at this point of people asking for assistance to get back?
Well, the number that I've given you are people who are asking to be helped. The 3,639. All of them say that they were stopped from returning because of the lockdown. They're totally stranded and require assistance. And they're all over the world. And I get messages all day, every day.
And what are the challenges that you're currently facing, Minister, in trying to get people back home?
Essentially, a large part of the globe is under lockdown. That is the first difficulty. And a number of people who require help are not close to airports, so it's not easy to communicate with them. Many of them had not planned to stay as long as they have had to in the countries in which they're located. And so they don't have accommodation, or they're having to ask local citizens to help them. Some were at airports when the lockdown was announced, and flights were immediately cancelled. So they've been sitting at airports. Others say they, had to sleep there. Some immigration officials have been kind, others have been rather nasty. So it's a large plethora of problems. And then, of course, the large groups are persons who were on ships, on cruise ships, which were no longer permitted to sail from certain capitals. So you have 139 or so South Africans who were from a cruise ship, and they are now stuck in Rome, in Italy. And this occurs in various parts. In Brazil, we have a number. We've been able to arrange for them to come back. And the cruise company has actually been very, cooperative and are assisting with the costs for those. So those citizens will arrive today. Really we've had to work with other governments to arrange for our citizens to be allowed to travel overground to an airport and be at one collecting point so that we can have them board the aeroplane that has been arranged.
And Minister, how cooperative have these other governments been that you've engaged with?
They've been absolutely good, and in fact, I must thank countries such as Germany, Brazil, Belgium, that have really given us a great deal of help. I also found that there are airlines where the staff are extremely helpful. So we've had cooperation. The real challenge is when one is has to fly from OR Tambo, but you're located in some distant part of South Africa, and it's really difficult to have you travel 12 hours in order to get to Johannesburg. Those are the sticky points, and we're trying to resolve that.
So, Minister, obviously there would be a huge cost to all of this. And as you said, in the instance where the cruise liner is involved, they have come up and picked up some of that tab. But how much, are you able to tell us how much this has cost government at this stage, trying to repatriate as many South Africans?
Well, as you would be aware, government does not have money for this. We did not provide for it in our budgeting. We would anticipate that the 3,000 plus people left South Africa with return tickets. So we have been able to endorse the tickets to a different airline or make the arrangements I've referred to with the cruise ship company. We also have been assisted by South African Airways agreeing to a cost of ticket for those who need to purchase. That is much cheaper than would ordinarily be charged by SAA or other airlines. So we've had help all along the way, and we will continue to look for help. We've also had donations from larger corporates in South Africa, assisting either with jet fuel or with costs for passengers. So we've already repatriated 163 South Africans, and from today, which is 8th of April, we'll have arrivals almost every day from different parts of the world.
And of course, Minister, government adopted this practice that South Africans who had been out of the country should be placed on quarantine upon return. So you say there are people returning today. How has that process worked, and where exactly will they be arriving today?
Well, arrivals can only be at the international airports that have been designated by government, and that is OR Tambo International, or Cape Town, or King Shaka International. We will not be having any flights to King Shaka. We will use primarily OR Tambo, and depending on the passenger load, we may have a flight that would take people through to Cape Town. But I have to indicate that we have been fairly strict in terms of the regulations to indicate that we do require that you be screened thoroughly and that you undergo the mandatory quarantine period. This is necessary because, as the viewers would know, we don't want to have a growth in internal transmission. We're not saying that anyone is infected as they arrive, but we're saying let's exercise utmost care in ensuring we protect both those who are returning as well as South Africans who are here at home.
Now, Minister, we've been talking in the main about South Africans being repatriated, but of course there are other foreign nationals who are in South Africa. We saw last week those flights to Germany repatriating their citizens. Are there any other such efforts afoot at the moment?
Yes, we are actually a huge beneficiary of the flights that have been chartered, mainly utilizing South African Airways by foreign countries, and they have agreed that on the return leg, we can have our citizens board those aeroplanes. So that has also saved. Really appreciate the contribution that our partners internationally are making. This is the case with Brazil. as well as with Germany. Germany had the largest number of foreign citizens in South Africa. I think they range at the level of 7,000, so much bigger than the number we've got outside. And they have begun a process through a number of aeroplane flights that will take place over the next few days. Brazil has a number as well. They've arranged with their airline LATAM and are also using South African Airways for their citizens. So we'll have a plane. It left Sao Paulo, I think, yesterday. So there'll be a plane from Brazil with about 67 South African citizens arriving later today. So yes, we have, used the opportunity of the return of visitors to South Africa to bring South Africans back as well.
And Minister, perhaps easier when you're talking about governments that have the means, that are in stronger financial positions. But I received a message yesterday from someone, a Zimbabwean, who wanted to know why they were not being repatriated. So with regard to perhaps our neighbouring countries, what is the situation there?
We've not had any request for assistance from neighbouring countries. We have had requests from our citizens who may have been stopped from re-entering South Africa at a land border. We liaise with Home Affairs and the police in those cases, and we have had a few returns via land borders from Namibia, Eswatini, and Botswana. But I don't recall any of the SADC countries contacting my department. The way that we're trying to manage this process is, we've said, it should be Foreign Affairs Department to Foreign Affairs. So it would be via DIRCO always. And we do it formally by note verbal, and then in discussion between the two countries, we make the appropriate arrangements.
And of course, Minister, we are only into day 13 of our lockdown. And as we saw in Wuhan, for example, they have been under lockdown and it was only lifted today, day 76. So are you expecting those numbers for calls from people who want to be repatriated to change? Are there any conditions that could give a rise to that number?
Well, Sakina, I really want to stress that we're not saying, everybody must come back. We're talking about persons who are distressed, who are in dire circumstances, and who had gone with the intention of returning after a short period. We're talking of the elderly who would really want to be home, but again are struggling to come back. We're talking of persons who are infirm, who need medical care and would rather have that in South Africa. And these are all South Africans. We're trying to discourage a general movement because this actually would be against the prescripts of combating this pandemic. So there are people who are in a country, have been there for some years, and they're saying, I want to, we also want to come back. And we said, no, this is not about visiting South Africa. We're assisting South Africans who are stranded and who do not have the means or the ability to return home.
And then, Minister, I remember earlier in the month or towards the end of last month, there was a group of South Africans stuck in North Africa, and they actually were willing to pay part of the cost or charter a flight. Is there any update on that situation and what happened with them?
Yes, no, they're back. They came back home. We were able to get assistance from my colleague, Minister Baristo of Morocco, the Foreign Affairs Minister. He was extremely helpful with getting the necessary authorizations, and eventually that charter took off. We have similar situations in other countries where our citizens say there's several of us, we're able to put money together, we can charter, but the thing is, if there's a lockdown, it's extremely difficult. So we ask them, please give us more details. Could your airline apply give us the necessary details, and we will then facilitate.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for your time this morning. Dr. Naledi Pandor is the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, for giving us an update on thousands of South Africans who remain stranded abroad and, of course, the department and government's efforts to try and get them back home in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak. And as you heard the Minister say there, South Africa did not budget for this, does not necessarily have the money. But, of course, there has been great cooperation with other nations, and they are taking full advantage of the return flights where citizens from other countries have been repatriated from South Africa, and then they've made use and taken the opportunity to repatriate citizens back on those return flights. So the airlines also, as far as they can, coming to the party. But let's just take